She didn't knock. She didn't speak. She simply appeared barefoot, bruised, and silent at the edge of his land as the sun disappeared behind the pines. And he, a grieving single father, who had stopped believing in second chances, opened the door anyway. What followed was not a miracle. It was something quieter, stronger, born from a whisper, a porch light, and the way two broken souls learn to hold light again. If stories like this speak to your heart tales of healing, quiet love and the power of kindness, we invite you to subscribe. There's more light to come. Now, let's begin The Lantern in the Dark. The wind over Dry Creek Ridge came down like a sigh that had waited all day to be released. Dust curled across the gravel path leading to the edge of Caleb Moore's cabin, an old, weather-beaten structure tucked just far enough into the pines to be forgotten by most. It was late October, the kind of day where the sun set early, and the cold arrived not with grace, but certainty. Caleb had just finished splitting the last of the firewood. His gloves were stiff with sap, and his back reminded him again that he wasn't 30 anymore. He leaned the axe against the porch rail and exhaled. The quiet was usual and complete until it wasn't. He heard it, a sound that didn't belong. Not wind, not fox, not coyote. Footsteps. Soft, uneven, hesitant, like someone dragging one leg behind them. Caleb straightened instinct overriding weariness. He glanced toward the tree line, where the last light of day hovered like a question unanswered. And then she emerged. A girl, no, a young woman, barefoot, dust-streaked, wearing a thin gray dress that hung off her frame like surrender. Her arms were wrapped around herself. Her hair was long and unkempt, pulled into a loose braid that had nearly unraveled. She stopped just before the gate, as if unsure the earth beyond it was safe to step on. Caleb didn't move. Years of silence had taught him the power of stillness. She looked up at him. Eyes too old for her age. Eyes that had seen things no one should have to see. "I'm not here to steal," she said at her voice hoarse and low. I need to sit. Just for a while. Please." The words weren't practiced, but they were not new. She had said them before somewhere else, probably too many times. Caleb nodded once almost imperceptibly and stepped aside. "Come on in," he said. "You can rest on the porch if you want." She limped up the steps, wincing with each movement. Her right foot was swollen and bleeding along the arch. Caleb's eyes flicked down, then back up. He didn't ask questions. Instead, he opened the door to the cabin and held it. The woman hesitated, looking past him as if she could read the room with her bones. Finally, she stepped inside. The warmth of the fire that had been burning since morning spilled into her like sunlight breaking into a cave. She sank onto the edge of the worn leather couch and held her hands out to the flames, trembling. "I'm Caleb," he said, setting his gloves on the counter. "My son's upstairs. He's 6. Name's Eli. He sleeps early." She nodded, not meeting his eyes. "I'm Grace," she whispered. Fitting, he thought. He boiled water for tea and knelt beside her with a first aid kit. "I'd like to clean your foot if that's okay." There was a pause and then a nod. He worked in silence, wiping the wound, gently wrapping it with clean gauze. She flinched once, but said nothing. Her hands rested limply in her lap, fingers twitching slightly with nerves, or memory he couldn't tell. When he finished, he handed her the cup of tea. "You can sleep here tonight," he said. "Sofa's comfortable enough." "I'll be gone by morning," she murmured. "I'm not looking to stay anywhere." "I didn't say you were," Caleb replied evenly. She glanced up, and for a moment the firelight caught something in her expression, a flicker of suspicion melting into a sliver of something else. Not trust, not yet, but something that knew kindness when it met it. The room was quiet, except for the crackle of the fire and the ticking of the old mantel clock. Outside, the wind died down like even the night was holding its breath. Grace curled onto the sofa, clutching the fleece throw that Caleb had laid beside her. Her eyelids began to sink, but her voice stopped him just as he reached for the light switch. Why was it on? Caleb turned confused. What she gestured weakly toward the shelf. The lantern. The one with the brass base. It was lit when I walked up. Caleb froze. He hadn't touched that lantern in 6 years. It had belonged to his wife. She used to light it every night, no matter what. It had sat there, cold and dusty, since the night she died. Caleb hadn't thought about it, hadn't looked at it. He had buried that part of the house the way he had buried the ache. But tonight, before he opened the door, something had compelled him to light it. He looked at the flickering flame, then back at Grace, who was already half asleep, her breath softening. "I guess," he said slowly. "I thought you might need a little more light." Grace didn't answer. Her breathing evened, deepened. But just before the silence reclaimed the cabin, she murmured one last thing. "You lit it for me, but I think it brought you back." Morning came slowly to the ridge, casting a pale gold light through the pine slats of the old cabin windows. The first sounds were simple. The rustling of trees, the faint creak of settling wood, and the soft shuffle of little feet upstairs. Caleb Moore stood by the stove, stirring oatmeal in a cast-iron pot. He hadn't slept much, not because of fear or suspicion, but because something inside him refused to rest. For the first time in years, his thoughts had wandered beyond routine and firewood and bedtime stories for Eli. They wandered toward her. She hadn't asked for anything. Not food, not shelter, not explanation. And that, more than any injury or vagueness, was what unnerved him most. People who were desperate usually asked. People who were running usually lied. But Grace, she'd come out of the trees like a memory and simply sat down, as though the ground had finally stopped spinning for her. He heard the gentle sound of movement behind him. She was awake. Grace stood in the doorway, barefoot on the wood floor, her dress still dusty from the day before, but her face softer somehow in the daylight. Her hair was messier, if that was possible, but it gave her a kind of fragile humanity that unsettled and humbled him at once. "I didn't mean to sleep in," she murmured. "You needed it," Caleb said without turning. She took a hesitant step forward, eyes scanning the room like she didn't want to belong in it. "Where's your boy?" "Still upstairs," Caleb replied. "He likes to pretend he's a lion before he gets out of bed." Grace gave a breath of a smile. It was small, quiet, but it was real. "You hungry?" Caleb asked, ladling oatmeal into a pair of bowls. She paused, as if the answer might cost her something. "I can eat," she said carefully. "Not quite, yes. Not quite, no." He placed the bowl on the table without comment. She sat, hands in her lap, for a moment before she touched the spoon. Her eyes flicked to the side, occasionally tracking every sound, every shadow. "Used to eating alone?" he asked casually. She didn't look up. "Used to not eating." Caleb leaned back against the counter, arms crossed. He didn't pry. She didn't offer. Eli's thudding feet broke the quiet as he barreled down the stairs in his footed pajamas, half lion, half whirlwind. "Morning," the boy shouted. Grace flinched but quickly caught herself. Caleb saw it the way she straightened, trying to be invisible. "Eli," Caleb said gently. "We have a guest. Her name is Grace." The boy stopped halfway to the kitchen, curious and blinking. "She hurt her foot last night. She's going to rest here for a bit." Eli took a cautious step forward, peering up at her. "Does it hurt a lot?" Grace blinked, then shook her head. "Not anymore." Eli studied her for a moment, then announced, "I had a dream about a turtle with a cape." Grace smiled again, wider this time. "Did it fly?" "No," Eli said seriously, "but it walked really fast." She laughed just once, but enough to shift something in the air. Caleb felt it. The first crack of warmth in a long frozen place. Breakfast passed in quiet conversation between father and son, with Grace listening more than speaking. She never asked what would happen next. She never asked to stay. She simply remained seated, palms resting flat against the wooden table, like she wasn't ready to let go of its solidity. Later that morning, Caleb found her outside, sitting on the porch step with Eli, who was showing her how to whistle with a blade of grass. You put it here, no here, and then blow. Grace tried, failed, and laughed again, not too loudly, as though she still didn't fully trust the sound of her own joy. Caleb stepped onto the porch, a cup of coffee in his hand. You've got an audience, he said, nodding toward the woods. Grace looked up, startled. A blackbird sat on the fence post, watching them in stillness. That thing's been circling the cabin since spring, Caleb explained. Never leaves. Doesn't seem afraid, Grace said, tilting her head. Neither are you, he replied quietly. She didn't answer right away. Then I'm not brave, Caleb. I'm just tired of being afraid. There it was. The truth. The undercurrent beneath every glance, every silence. She stood brushing dirt from her dress. I'll head out in a bit, she said. Don't want to cause trouble? You didn't, Caleb said. You don't know me. He met her eyes. No. But I know how it feels to walk through fire and pretend you're not burning. She looked away. That kind of honesty was too heavy to hold in the morning light. He didn't ask her to stay. She didn't ask if she could. That was what made it different. She didn't ask, and he didn't need her to. The afternoon sun dipped low behind the ridge, casting long golden shadows across the dry earth. Inside the cabin, the light dimmed, slowly painting the walls in hues of rust and copper. Caleb stood by the window, hands in his pockets, watching Grace through the glass. She sat on the porch again, this time with Eli beside her, the boy's head leaning against her arm as he told her about his favorite bedtime story, the one about the man who carved a ship out of a single tree. She listened not out of politeness, but with the kind of quiet attention that children can feel, but rarely explain. Caleb turned away. He wasn't sure what unsettled him more, the fact that she hadn't left yet, or the way her presence didn't feel like an intrusion. He had made a life out of absence, the absence of sound, of touch, of asking for more than what the day offered. And now this woman, this stranger, had made the silence feel crowded. When the sun slipped behind the last line of trees, Caleb moved toward the bookshelf. His hand hovered over an old brass lantern, its glass fogged with dust, its base dull with age. He hadn't lit it since the night his wife died. That night still visited him, in flashes, the soft groan of the floorboards, when she stood in the kitchen for water, the crash of the cup, the frantic dial tone when his hand shook too much to press the right numbers, the blood, the silence. The lantern had been lit then. She always lit it before bed, said it helped her breathe. After the ambulance left, Caleb sat beside it until the flame went out on its own. And then he left it there, untouched, unburning, entombed. Until now, he picked it up gently like it might crumble in his hands, cleaned the glass with his sleeve, found the old tin of matches tucked behind a stack of cookbooks. With one deliberate strike, the match came to life. The flame danced nervously at first, then steadied inside the lantern, casting a warm, amber glow across the cabin walls. It felt like a resurrection. Out on the porch, Grace looked up when she heard the door creak open. Caleb stepped out holding the lantern. He hung it on the hook above the swing, where Eli used to sit with his mother. It gets dark fast up here, he said. Grace nodded slowly. I noticed. She glanced at the lantern, then back at him. Her eyes were unreadable in the twilight. I hope it's okay I'm still here, she said after a long pause. Caleb didn't answer right away. Instead, he sat beside her and looked out toward the woods where the sky was turning the color of bruised plum. Most people, he said slowly, leave before the second night. You're not the first person to come through here. Grace stiffened slightly, as if reminded that she was still temporary. But Caleb added, "You're the first one I lit that lantern for." That made her turn to him. Really turn. "Why now?" she asked. He stared at the trees, because when you walked out of that forest, you looked like someone who needed to know light still exists. Silence followed. Not heavy, but full. Charged. Grace lowered her gaze. Her fingers toyed with the hem of her sleeve, tugging at a loose thread. "You didn't ask what happened," she said, voice barely audible. "No." "Why, because I figured you'd tell me when you were ready." Her lips parted like she might respond, but the words didn't come. Instead, she leaned back against the porch, post, eyes closed, letting the light of the lantern spill over her like a blanket she wasn't used to needing. Eli came out a moment later, with his stuffed rabbit in one hand and his sketch pad in the other. "Can I draw Grace?" he asked. Grace blinked. "You want to draw me?" Eli nodded earnestly. "You look like someone in a story." She laughed again, light, breathy, real. "I'm not much of a story, Eli." He shrugged, already pulling crayons from his pocket. "Everyone's a story. That's what Daddy says." Caleb blinked, surprised. He hadn't remembered saying that. But maybe he had. Maybe once upon a time before his voice had rusted and his heart had slowed. Grace let the boy sit beside her as he began sketching, tongue peeking from the corner of his mouth in concentration. She watched him quietly, eyes soft. Caleb rose and went inside, returning with 2 mugs coffee for him, tea for her. She took it with both hands, warming her palms. The lantern flickered in the growing dark, casting shadows that danced across the porch, across the people who sat there. One rebuilding, one relearning, one just beginning. "I used to be afraid of the dark," Grace said softly. "But I think I was more afraid of what light would show me." Caleb looked at her. "What do you see now?" She turned to him. Their eyes met in that orange-hued quiet. "I see a man who still lights a lantern for someone else." The wind picked up that night, sharp whispering through the eaves, like a memory trying to return. Inside the cabin, warmth pulsed gently from the stone fireplace. Eli had fallen asleep, wrapped in his dinosaur blanket, one hand still clutching a crayon. His half-finished drawing of Grace lay crooked on the coffee table, her outline uncertain, but her eyes drawn large, as if the boy instinctively knew they were the most important part. Caleb watched the fire for a while, then climbed the stairs to check on his son. Eli's breathing was even deep, the kind of sleep children fall into when they feel safe. He stayed there for a minute longer, really not out of worry, but habit. The quiet of the cabin wrapped around him like a coat he hadn't worn in years. Back downstairs, Grace still sat in the chair by the fire. She hadn't said much after dinner. She had offered to wash the dishes, and he had let her. That small act, her sleeves rolled to the elbows, hands moving quietly over plates, had filled the cabin with something he hadn't felt in a long time. Not noise, not bustle, but life. Now, as Caleb reached to turn off the last of the porch lights, he caught a sound that wasn't the wind, a note, a tone, barely audible. Singing. He paused. The melody was thin, almost weightless, like breath woven through shadow. It took him a moment to realize what it was. She was humming. Not loud enough for performance, just loud enough for comfort, like someone singing to an old ache so it wouldn't feel alone. He stepped down one stair, quietly peering around the corner. Grace sat cross-legged by the hearth, her back to him, a mug of lukewarm tea cradled in both hands. And then it came her voice. Soft, steady, delicate in its brokenness. Hush now, the storm is sleeping. The night won't hold you long. Light will find you reaching, even if you're wrong. The melody pierced through something deep in Caleb's chest. He knew that song. He had written it. Years ago when his wife was pregnant with Eli. They'd lost a baby before, and the fear had turned their nights into quiet fields of tension. He wrote that lullaby in the back of a medical journal, played it once on the porch just for her. She'd cried when she heard it, said it felt like a promise. He never played it again after she died. How did Grace know it? She didn't see him standing there. She finished the verse and fell silent, staring into the fire like it was the only place left that didn't ask questions. He stepped back, let the moment be hers. The next morning, Caleb didn't mention the song. He made breakfast eggs, toast, bacon. The smell filled the cabin like a familiar hymn. Eli bounded downstairs, chattering about a dream involving a giant pickle that tried to steal his shoes. Grace sat at the table smiling faintly, the way someone does when they've survived another night without giving up. As they ate, Caleb caught her eye once. She held his gaze. He saw it there, just a flicker, the recognition that he knew. But neither of them said anything. After breakfast, Eli dragged Grace outside to show her a secret fort behind the woodshed. Caleb used the moment alone to refill the wood box. He didn't think, didn't analyze, just worked the way he always did through motion. But even as he chopped logs, the melody clung to him. He returned to the cabin mid-morning to find Grace folding Eli's sketchpad pages into a neat pile. She was humming again. Not the lullaby this time, but something simpler, brighter. "Where'd you learn that song?" he asked, setting the wood down. She froze, the hum dying on her lips. Her hands flattened the page a little too carefully. "I didn't learn it," she said, without looking at him. "I remembered it." How she was quiet. Then finally I heard it once, a long time ago. From the trees. Caleb frowned. From the trees, Grace sat down, the paper forgotten. "Before I came here. There was a night She stopped, her hands folded into each other. I was going to do something permanent. Something stupid. I walked out past the bridge near Ash Hollow. It was cold. Everything in me felt done. Caleb listened, unmoving. I sat down by a tree. There wasn't a car in sight, no lights, no houses, just dark. And then I heard it, someone playing guitar. Soft, slow. That song. Her voice cracked. I thought maybe it was God, or a ghost, or maybe I'd already gone. But it kept playing, just long enough to keep me breathing. Caleb's jaw clenched. He remembered that night. It had been late spring. He couldn't sleep, so he'd gone out on the porch with his old guitar, something he hadn't touched in months. He didn't plan to play anything. His fingers had moved before his thoughts caught up. The bridge wasn't far from his land. It had been him. And now she was here, in his home, holding his son's drawings, singing the song that saved her. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. I guess Grace said softly, "That was the night you lit the lantern. You just didn't know it." The wind had died down by nightfall, leaving the air outside the cabin still and unusually warm for October. Inside, the wood stove crackled softly, casting amber light over the worn floorboards. The house seemed quieter than usual, more than silence. It was the kind of quiet that arrived when unspoken things hung thick in the air. Caleb sat at the kitchen table, turning a half-empty mug of coffee in his hand. He hadn't picked up his guitar since the conversation that morning, since Grace told him about the bridge, since he realized it had been him. A single nameless act of habit strumming through memory one lonely night had reached someone on the edge of giving up. He had no idea. And yet now, the girl who once sat alone in the dark with nothing but a melody to hold her together was here in his cabin, humming that same tune, like it was a thread still keeping her stitched to this world. He wasn't sure what to do with that. Eli had gone to bed early, worn out from building a nest of sticks and pine cones with Grace that afternoon. Caleb had watched from the porch as the two of them moved through the yard, with an ease that felt rehearsed, like they'd always been part of the same rhythm. It stirred something inside him that felt like hope, dangerous, uninvited hope. Now, as he sat in the quiet, he heard the floor creak behind him. Grace appeared at the edge of the hallway, wrapped in one of the old knit blankets that once belonged to Caleb's mother. Her hair was loose, and her eyes were soft, but tired, like she'd been holding up too much for too long. "I didn't mean to wake you," Caleb said. "You didn't." He gestured to the other chair. "Couldn't sleep." She hesitated, then stepped forward and sat, her hands cupped around a warm mug of tea, though she hadn't touched it. "I keep thinking about that night," she said. "At the bridge." Caleb looked at her, but said nothing. "I wasn't trying to be dramatic," she added quickly, like defending herself from a courtroom no one else could see. I didn't want to feel anymore. Everything I touched broke. Every voice I heard hurt. I thought I'd already died a little just slower." Caleb's chest tightened. "I didn't plan on hearing music," she continued, "but when I did, it felt like someone had lit a match just far enough away to see that I still had a shadow. It scared me, because if I had a shadow, then I still existed. And if I still existed, then maybe I had to keep going." Her voice faltered. She stared into the steam rising from her tea. Caleb finally spoke, slow and careful. "Do you know what that song meant to me?" She shook her head. "I wrote it for my wife," he said. "When we were expecting Eli. We'd lost a baby the year before. She was scared. I was too. I couldn't fix it, couldn't promise anything. So I did the only thing I knew. I wrote her something soft, something to hold her when I couldn't find the words." Grace's eyes shimmered. "Did she ever hear it?" Caleb nodded. "Once. She cried, then made me promise to play it when the baby was born." His throat tightened. "I never got the chance. She didn't ask for details. The silence that followed was not out of discomfort, but reverence." "I'm sorry," she whispered. Caleb looked at her. "You're not the only one who sat somewhere thinking the dark might be better than the pain." She glanced down. Her fingers trembled slightly as she set the mug on the table. "You want to know the part that finally broke me?" she asked. Caleb didn't speak, just waited. Grace stared ahead. "It was 2 days before I walked out of those trees. I was in a shelter, if you could call it that. A man told me I wasn't worth the space I took up. Said I was just an echo of somebody else's mistake." Caleb's fists clenched under the table. "I didn't argue," she said, "because I believed him." She looked up at him then, and her voice dropped to a near whisper. "But then I came here. And you, without knowing me, without asking anything, you cleaned my foot. You made tea. You lit that lantern. And you didn't tell me I mattered, but you acted like I did. And that was louder than everything else." The weight of her words landed between them like a confession neither of them knew they needed to give or receive. Caleb leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. His voice was low but unwavering. "I didn't save you, Grace. You saved yourself. I just opened a door." Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. "I've been through a lot," she said, "but no one ever told me that being seen could feel like being healed." Then she said it, quiet as breath. "You didn't just light a lantern that night. You lit one in me." Caleb didn't respond with words. He reached out slowly, gently, and placed his hand over hers. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't dramatic. It was human, warm, anchoring. And Grace didn't pull away. They sat there for a long time in the glow of the firelight and the gentle hum of old timber. Two people who had both lost too much and yet somehow found each other in the middle of nowhere. Not with declarations, not with promises, just presence. And sometimes that's where healing begins. The days that followed came with a strange, almost fragile peace. It was the kind you don't speak of out loud for fear of breaking it. The cabin, once quiet out of necessity, now pulsed with a softer rhythm, laughter from the porch, the clinking of dishes being washed by 2 sets of hands instead of 1, the hum of Grace's voice drifting down the hall as she helped Eli sort crayons by color. Caleb watched it unfold without interfering. Not because he didn't care, but because he didn't want to scare it away. There was something healing in Grace's presence, not fast or loud, but steady. She never asked to stay, and he never told her she could. And yet, with each passing day, she made herself part of the fabric of their lives in small, graceful ways. Folding laundry that wasn't hers, braiding Eli's hair into a lopsided warrior braid for fun, leaving little sprigs of pine on the window ledges like she was decorating a space in her soul. But even in the warmth, Caleb sensed the weight she carried like a woman walking carefully over thin ice. She laid herself. It came to the surface one evening, quiet as breath. Caleb had just finished stacking firewood behind the cabin when he heard something sharp, sudden. Not a voice, not a crash, a breath, cut short. He followed the sound around the corner, boots crunching against gravel. The back door was slightly ajar. Inside the kitchen, light was on, casting a faint glow across the floorboards. And there, near the sink, Grace was on her knees, arms wrapped tightly around her middle, her forehead pressed against a cabinet door, her whole body trembling. Caleb stopped cold. She didn't see him. He took a step forward. Grace. His voice was low, not soft. She gasped, startled, turning away slightly. Sorry. I dropped a glass. Her voice was too calm, her eyes too wide. On the floor, a single mug had rolled under the counter, still whole. Caleb didn't move. You weren't reaching for it. Grace shook her head, swallowed hard, and stared at the floor like it had betrayed her. I'm fine, she whispered. Something came over me. Caleb stepped closer, kneeling slowly beside her. You don't have to explain, he said gently. But you also don't have to pretend. That was all it took. Her shoulders crumpled forward, and the sob came not like a crack, but like a dam giving way. She didn't cry like someone seeking comfort. She cried like someone who hadn't cried in so long she forgot how not to. Caleb didn't touch her, didn't reach for her. He simply sat there silent and still, giving her the space no one else ever had. I hate this, she said through clenched teeth. I hate that I break like this over nothing. I'm not this fragile. I swear I'm not. I believe you, he said. She shook her head. You shouldn't. You don't know me. Maybe not, he said. But I'm getting to. Her breathing slowed. She sat back against the cabinet, eyes red, but clearer now. I lived with a man for almost 2 years, she said, voice flat. He didn't hit me. Not with fists, just words. Just enough to make me believe I was nothing. He isolated me from everyone. My parents had passed. I had no siblings. By the end of it, I thought I was the problem. Caleb stayed quiet. Then one night she continued, I forgot to unplug the iron. Nothing happened. Nothing caught fire. But he looked at me like I'd burned the house down, and he said, You shouldn't be trusted with anything, not even yourself. Her throat tightened again, but she pressed on. I left that night. No plan. No bag. Just ran. I walked 5 miles in the dark to the bus station. I had $24 and no idea where to go. For months I slept in shelters, on benches behind churches. Got used to being invisible. And the bridge, Caleb asked gently. Grace nodded. I think I just got tired of not existing. Until I heard you. The weight of those words settled over him again. The unexpected impact of a single moment, a man with a guitar on a porch, unknowingly giving someone just enough hope to keep breathing. Caleb leaned forward slightly. "You weren't invisible that night." Grace looked at him. He added, "You're not invisible now." Tears slipped silently down her cheeks, but this time, she didn't hide them. Later that night, after Grace had gone to bed and Eli was fast asleep, Caleb stepped out onto the porch with his guitar. He hadn't played it since the day Grace told him her story. He ran his fingers across the strings now, not to perform, not to recall, but to answer, to respond. Under the lantern's glow, he played that lullaby again. Slower this time. Softer. In the window, he saw her silhouette. She didn't come outside. She didn't need to. She was listening. And maybe that was enough. The morning after Caleb played guitar on the porch, the air around the cabin felt different. Not heavier, not lighter, but still. Like the silence after a prayer. Grace moved more slowly that day, not out of exhaustion, but thoughtfulness. Something had settled in her the night before, something she hadn't dared let in for a very long time. She hadn't told Caleb, but she didn't sleep much. Not because she was afraid, but because she wasn't. And that in itself felt foreign. Eli, however, woke early. Caleb found him at the kitchen table scribbling onto the back of a cereal box with a crayon tongue out in concentration. He looked up and grinned when his father entered. "Daddy," he said. Holding up the crude drawing, I made a new superhero. Caleb leaned over. The figure was stick-thin with wild red hair and a cape made of fire. "Who's this?" Caleb asked. "She's called Flame Girl. She saves people without punching anything." Caleb smiled. "Sounds powerful. She sings," Eli said seriously. "And the bad guys just stop." Caleb ruffled his son's hair. "Don't let Marvel steal that." Grace appeared then, rubbing sleep from her eyes, her sweatshirt too big, and her expression soft. Eli looked up at her, like he always did now, with something like awe and something like ownership, as if she belonged in the rhythm of his days, and he knew it before anyone else. "Grace," he said, holding up the picture. "This is you, kind of." She blinked, taken off guard. "Me, you sing and you save," he said simply. "And your hair is kinda wild." Caleb choked on a laugh behind his coffee. Grace smiled, faint but genuine, and sat across from the boy. "You're something else, Eli Moore." He grinned proudly, then leaned his elbow on the table and studied her for a moment. "Grace, can I ask you something?" Her smile dimmed just slightly. "Of course." His eyes were wide, innocent, clear. "Are you my new mom?" The world tilted. Caleb froze at the counter, shoulders locked. Grace's face went pale, not with fear, but fragility. She didn't look at Caleb, didn't move, didn't breathe for a full second. Then she knelt beside Eli's chair, gently resting her hand over his. "Oh, sweet boy," she said softly. "I'm not your mom." Eli nodded slowly. "But you make breakfast, and you read with me, and you sang when I had my nightmare." Caleb closed his eyes. Grace's voice didn't waver. "I know," she said, "and I love doing all of that. I love being here with you. But your mom, your real mom, she loved you first. And she always will, even if you can't see her." Eli's face tightened. "But I don't remember her, just pictures." Grace took a slow breath. "That's okay. Sometimes the heart remembers what the brain forgets." He didn't fully understand, but something in him relaxed. He crawled into her lap, tucking his head beneath her chin. Caleb watched from across the room, unable to move. And then Eli said it, quiet as wind. "Can I still call you Grace?" "Mom," in my head. Grace's lip trembled. She closed her eyes. "You can call me whatever feels safe," she whispered. Later that day, when Eli went to play in the yard, Caleb found Grace sitting on the porch steps, her hands laced tightly between her knees. He didn't mean anything by it, she said, without looking at him. Kids just say things. I know, she swallowed. I didn't want to lie, but I didn't want to hurt him either. You didn't. A pause. I'm not trying to take anyone's place, she added, voice thin, especially not hers. I know that too. Grace turned to him. Do you ever wish she was still here? Caleb didn't answer right away. He looked out toward the trees, the same trees Grace had once emerged from, limping and afraid. I used to wish it every day, he said. But lately, I just wish she could see us. Grace blinked. Us. You. Eli. This porch. The light in the cabin again. He paused. She would have liked you, he added. Grace bit her lip. Even if I come with cracks, Caleb smiled faintly. Especially then. They sat there in silence, side by side. No need to say more. In that stillness, something passed between them. Not a declaration, not a promise. Just a quiet acceptance that whatever this was, it was real. Eli's laughter rang out from the side of the house, chasing butterflies. The lantern above the porch flickered gently in the breeze, the flame inside holding steady. And for the first time in years, Caleb didn't feel like he was waiting for anything to begin. He was already in it. And so was she. The cabin always held a certain stillness in the early morning, before the fire was lit, before Eli's footsteps padded across the wood floor, before the kettle sang its familiar tune. That morning, however, it felt still in a different way. Empty. Pausing. Like something had been removed too quietly to notice right away. Caleb was the first to sense it. He rose with the same rhythm he always had, coffee stove, firewood. But the moment he walked into the living room and saw the couch perfectly arranged, the blanket folded, the mug washed, and left to dry on the counter, he knew. She was gone. No creak of the bedroom door, no humming from the porch, no Grace. His heart sank with a weight that surprised even him. He didn't panic, not outwardly. But something tightened in his chest as he opened the front door and scanned the horizon. The trail toward the road was faint, but he saw them footprints. Lopsided from her still healing foot, pressed slightly deeper into the dust, leading away. Not running. Not fleeing. Just leaving. He didn't wait. He saddled up his horse Duke, and within minutes was trotting down the trail, heart beating faster with every step. The sun was just lifting over the ridge, golden and gentle, but his thoughts were far from peaceful. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even confused. He was afraid that the girl who had walked out of the woods might now disappear into them again. Afraid that she still didn't believe she deserved to stay. He found her a mile down the dirt road, walking slow, head bowed, a small bag slung over her shoulder. Her figure looked even smaller against the wide stretch of wilderness behind her. He pulled Duke to a stop and dismounted. Grace. She turned, startled. When her eyes met his, she looked as if she had been caught doing something wrong. Not illegal, just unwelcome. I didn't want to wake Eli, she said quickly. I was going to leave a note. Caleb approached, calm but steady, while she opened her mouth, then shut it. Her hands gripped the strap of her bag so tightly her knuckles whitened. I overstayed, she said. You gave me more than I had a right to ask for. I didn't want to ruin that. Caleb's brow furrowed. Ruin what, this? She motioned vaguely toward the cabin behind him, the trees, the sky. You. Eli. The peace. He exhaled sharply. Grace, you didn't ruin anything. You built something here. She shook her head. No. I just took space until I didn't feel like a stranger. That's what people do when they belong, he said gently. Her voice cracked. but I don't belong anywhere. Then maybe that's the lie you've been told so many times you started believing it. Tears welled in her eyes. She turned her face away. I'm not good at staying, she whispered. Or being chosen. I've only ever been convenient. Or tolerated. I don't want to be someone you feel sorry for. I don't feel sorry for you, he said. She blinked at him. I see you, Caleb added. I see how you sit with Eli and don't rush his stories. I see how you fold the dish towel the same way my wife used to. I see how you hesitate before laughing like you're waiting for permission. I see all of it. And I don't pity you, Grace. He took a step forward. I admire you. Her lip trembled. Why, because you walked out of something that tried to bury you, and you still know how to be kind. That's not weakness. That's grace. She let out a shaky breath. Caleb held out his hand. No one's asking you to stay forever, he said. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't want you to walk back with me. Grace looked at his hand like it was a foreign language. Then slowly she took it. His grip was warm, solid, not possessive, inviting. They walked back in silence, side by side, the wind moving gently through the pines around them. When the cabin came into view, the porch light still glowed faintly in the dawn haze, and the lantern above the door flickered. She paused. You always leave that on? She asked. Not until you got here, he said. Now it feels strange to let it go out. Her eyes shimmered. I've never had anyone come after me, she said. You weren't running, Caleb replied. You were testing the world to see if anyone would notice you'd gone. She looked at him, tears finally spilling. Would you have let me go? He shook his head. No. That night, Grace sat beside Eli as he fell asleep, stroking his hair, with a tenderness that didn't need explanation. When she rose, she found Caleb on the porch, watching the stars appear. She stepped beside him, quiet. I think she said, I'd like to stay. He looked over. Just for a little while, she added. He smiled. Stay as long as the lantern's lit. The lantern above the porch had always been just a fixture, an old brass shell half forgotten, dulled by time and dust. But since Grace arrived, it had become something else. A sentinel, a symbol, a silent witness to the unlikely bloom of something none of them had dared to name. Each night, Caleb lit it. Each night, it stayed on just a little longer. That evening after Eli had gone to bed, with only one request that Grace not go anywhere ever again, Caleb stepped out to the porch, lantern in hand. The sun was falling behind the ridge, streaking the sky with fire and lavender. Grace followed him, 2 mugs of tea balanced in her hands. You always take it down before lighting it, she said as she passed him a mug. Old habit, Caleb replied. Like checking your pockets, even when you know they're empty. Grace leaned on the railing beside him, quiet. The air smelled of pine and dry leaves, like fall had decided to settle in early and unapologetically. Thank you, she said after a while. For the tea. For all of it. He looked at her, brow creased. You don't have to thank me. I do, she said. I didn't know what safety felt like, or quiet that wasn't lonely. You gave me both. Caleb didn't answer right away. He stared into the trees the way he always did when words failed him, the way he had stared the night she appeared from them. You didn't ask me to, she added softer. That's what makes it matter. He exhaled slowly, sipped his tea, and said, You gave something back too, Grace. She tilted her head. Like what? He glanced toward the cabin window, where Eli's drawing still hung, a child's sketch of Grace, holding a lantern light beaming from her chest. You brought the sound of life back into a house that only knew echoes, he said. I didn't realize how quiet I'd made the world until your laughter broke through it. She smiled faintly, eyes falling to the ground. I wasn't sure I'd ever laugh again. Neither was I. They stood in silence, watching the horizon dissolve into shadow. The lantern sat on the porch rail between them, waiting. Grace reached for it first. "Can I?" she asked. He nodded. She struck the match, fingers, steady eyes focused. The flame flared, caught the wick, and danced upward with a life of its own. She placed the glass dome over it gently, as if tucking in a child. The lantern flickered once, then glowed. Warm. Constant. They watched it for a while, neither needing to say anything more. The light spoke well enough for both of them. Inside the cabin, Eli stirred in his sleep and mumbled something about turtles. A breeze passed through the pines, and a few brittle leaves skittered across the porch floor. "You know," Grace said, wrapping her arms around herself, "I used to think love was only something you earned, like a prize, or something you had to be perfect for." Caleb turned to her, and now she looked at him with eyes clearer than they'd been since the day she arrived. "Now I think maybe love is just when someone stays, when they see the cracks and stay anyway." He stepped closer, not invading, just arriving. "I stayed," he said. "You did." He looked at her for a long moment, then reached up and gently tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear. His touch was feather-light, reverent. Her breath caught, but she didn't pull away. Neither moved to close the distance. There was no kiss, no dramatic crescendo, just a stillness that pulsed with meaning. The lantern glowed between them, its soft, steady flame catching in their eyes. "You don't have to know what comes next," Caleb said, voice low. "But I want you to know you don't have to walk through it alone." Grace swallowed hard. "Neither do you," she whispered. Later, when they parted for the night to his quiet bedroom, she to the small guest room she'd begun to call her own, the lantern remained lit. And from the road, if anyone had passed by that lonely stretch of cabin, they would have seen it, a golden flame in the dark. A light that said, "Someone is home. Someone is healing. Someone stayed." The first frost came in the night. By morning, the porch was laced with delicate white crystals, spiderweb thin and beautiful in their quiet arrival. Caleb stood by the window, coffee in hand, watching the sun melt away the frost as though nature itself were learning how to start over. Behind him, he heard soft steps. Grace. She'd begun to leave her door open in the mornings, and the sound of her presence had grown familiar, not just accepted, but expected. A new rhythm had formed, and though no one said it aloud, it was clear to all three of them that this was now home. She joined him by the window, arms folded tight around her sweatshirt. "It looks different," she murmured. "The frost." She shook her head. "The view. This house. Everything." Caleb nodded. "You've been seeing it through a different lens." She smiled faintly. "Yours?" He turned to her. "No. Yours." That afternoon, Grace sat at the kitchen table while Eli played on the rug behind her with plastic animals. She held a pencil in one hand, an old notebook of Caleb's in the other. The page was blank except for the words she had written at the top in trembling letters. "Who I was, who I am." She stared at it for a long time. Then she wrote her name. Not just Grace Turner, but her full name. Grace Marie Sinclair Turner. She hadn't used it since she was 19, since before the man who broke her peace. By peace convinced her she didn't need a past, didn't deserve a future. He had stripped away everything that made her real until all she had left was a first name she barely believed in. But now the name felt different, like a door swinging open. Caleb entered the room quietly and paused when he saw her writing. He didn't ask what it was, didn't need to. Grace looked up at him, then down at the page. "Marie was my mother's name," she said. "Sinclair was my father's. I gave them up when I didn't think I deserved to be anyone, Caleb sat across from her, and now she took a breath. "Now, I want them back." He nodded, eyes soft. "Then they're yours." Grace looked toward the window where the frost had fully melted. "You ever think we bury the wrong things?" she asked. "Like we try to kill off pain but end up burying the parts of ourselves that still believe in light." Caleb thought about that. Maybe we don't bury them. Maybe we just forget where we left them. She met his eyes. "You helped me remember." That evening, Grace cooked dinner. It wasn't fancy stew and cornbread, but it filled the cabin with warmth that had nothing to do with temperature. Eli helped, of course, which meant more flour on the floor than in the bowl, but no one minded. Not tonight. They ate together at the table. Grace told a story about her dad teaching her to fish, and for the first time her voice didn't falter when she spoke of the past. Caleb watched her as she laughed, head tilted slightly, eyes bright, and he knew with absolute clarity she wasn't surviving anymore. She was living. After dinner, while Eli brushed his teeth, Grace stood near the fireplace, arms wrapped around herself as the flames danced. Caleb joined her, his presence grounding. "I've been thinking," she said. "That always worries me," he replied, smiling. She nudged his arm gently. "I think I want to use my full name again. Not legally, just personally. Like a quiet rebellion against everything that tried to erase me." Caleb nodded. "Then say it." She hesitated. "It feels like standing on the edge of something." "You are," he said. "And you're not alone." So she said it. Not loud, not dramatic. Just a whisper. A resurrection. "My name is Grace Marie Sinclair Turner." The fire flickered behind her, golden and steady, casting her shadow long across the wood floor. Caleb reached for her hand. "You wear it well," he said. She looked at him, eyes shimmering. "I thought if I ever found someone who wanted to know all of me, they'd be scared off." "I'm still here, I know," she said. "That's what scares me." He smiled gently. "Then let's be scared together." Later, when the house was quiet and the lantern on the porch burned low, Caleb found the notebook on the kitchen table. Grace had left it open. Beneath her full name, one more line had been added. "I'm still becoming." He closed the notebook with care and placed it beside the lantern, whose soft glow reached across the room like a hand offered in silence. And he whispered her name, all of it to himself, not as a reminder of her past, but as a vow to walk with her into whatever came next. The morning light filtered through the lace curtains with the gentleness of someone knocking softly before entering. Outside, a layer of frost clung to the long grass, glittering like scattered salt in the sun. The cabin was still. Too still. Caleb stirred in bed, listening. No kettle whistling, no footsteps, no soft voice humming a half-remembered tune. For a moment, panic tightened in his chest, a ghost of an old fear. She left. The thought was uninvited, but immediate. He rose quickly, pulled on his flannel shirt, and moved through the hallway. The guest room door was ajar. Empty bed. Blanket folded. He pushed the door open farther. And then he saw it, her shoes, muddy, worn, and unmistakably still by the door. On the nightstand, her sketchbook lay open, the page filled with pencil marks, and one word written boldly in the center. "Hwyr." He exhaled. Then the smell hit him, coffee toast, something warm from the stove. In the kitchen, Eli sat cross-legged at the table, waving a crayon like a conductor. "Grace made French toast," he said proudly. "And she let me stir the eggs and everything." At the stove stood Grace, her hair up in a loose bun apron tied awkwardly around her waist. She looked up and smiled, not the tentative smile of someone grateful for shelter, but the settled, knowing smile of someone who had chosen to stay. Caleb stepped closer. "Morning," she said. He stared at her for a moment, just taking her in. "You okay?" she asked, tilting her head. "I thought." He hesitated, then shook his head. a sheepish grin tugging at his mouth. "Never mind." "Yeah." "I'm okay." Grace handed him a plate. "You were going to say you thought I left," she said gently. He looked down, smiled at the plate, then up at her. "Maybe." "Well, she said I did leave the room, but not the house." She met his eyes. Not the story. After breakfast, Grace took Eli out to the barn to help feed the chickens. Caleb stayed behind, leaning against the doorframe, watching them through the screen. She walked differently now, less like someone bracing for an invisible blow, and more like someone who'd learned to trust the ground beneath her feet. Eli darted around her in circles, laughing as he tried to keep pace with a hen. Grace laughed too full-throated and unguarded, and Caleb felt something settle in him that had been restless for a long, long time. Later, they gathered on the porch, the three of them wrapped in blankets, drinking cider that Grace had spiced with cinnamon. The lantern above them swung gently in the breeze, catching the sun's reflection like a wink from something wiser than them all. Eli sat between them, sleepy, leaning against Grace's shoulder. "Will we always live here now?" he asked. Caleb looked at Grace. She looked back at him. Then down at Eli. I think she said carefully, "This will always be the place where everything began." Eli squinted. "What began?" Caleb ran a hand through his son's hair. "Whatever we decide." That night, long after Eli had gone to bed, Caleb stood on the porch beside the lantern. Grace joined him quietly. "You know," she said, watching the flicker of the flame when I walked out of the trees that first night, "I didn't think I'd last a day here." "I remember," Caleb replied. "You looked like a ghost. I felt like one." She turned to face him. "But now I feel like a person again. Not fixed, not whole, but real." He nodded slowly. "I didn't think I'd let anyone close again," he admitted. "I was so afraid of losing more that I stopped letting myself have anything at all." She stepped closer. "Do you think," she asked, voice trembling, "that maybe people aren't meant to be saved by miracles? Maybe we're meant to be saved by each other?" Caleb looked at her. "I think you just explained grace." Her eyes shimmered. "I was named for it. Took me a long time to grow into it." He reached up and gently brushed her cheek with the back of his hand. "You wear it well." She smiled. Then he said the words, carefully, quietly. "Stay." And she whispered back, "I already did." At midnight, when the wind rose and the lantern swayed just slightly, its light reached through the dark, as it had for weeks, but now for the first time, not as a signal for the lost, but as a mark of belonging. The cabin didn't hold ghosts anymore. It held a woman who had found her name again, a man who had remembered how to feel, and a boy who would never have to wonder what it meant to be chosen. Sometimes, it's not the grand gestures that save us, but a hand held out in silence, a light left on, or a whisper that reminds us we're still here. That's what Caleb and Grace found, not in promises, but in presence. And maybe that's enough to start again. If this story touched something in you, we'd love to know where in the world are you watching from today. Drop us a comment below. We read everyone with care. And if you'd like more stories like this, full of quiet strength, healing, and hope, feel free to subscribe. There's always a seat for you here. Thank you truly for spending part of your day with us. Your time, your heart, and your presence mean more than words can say.